All right, so like I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be using a SQLite database. I'm building an app that will help Dota 2 team captains keep track of who their players play and like what positions they want to play, which is kind of a little problem that I've experienced as like an amateur team captain. And then I'm part of some groups of amateur teams where the captain's always like, hey, what heroes do you play again? And so this is sort of a really basic and essential solution to that. Again, we're going to be creating the create, read, update, and delete functions of this database, which means we can create new records, we can read records from the database, we can update them, and we can delete them. Those are the four essential things that any database should be able to do. And again, the reason that we are focusing on building a database here is because we want a way of keeping data permanently. A database is the number one way to keep data permanently outside of like text files or config files. But those are very specific things for specific tools or technology. Databases are the most general and fundamental way to keep data permanently across all software. So this isn't meant to be a tutorial, by the way. I'm going to be showing you several things, but I'm still going to speed it up because I don't want you to watch these videos eternally. If you want to learn about SQLite, there's a lot of resources out there. I am gonna talk over what I'm doing, but again, I don't want this to be like a tutorial. So basically, I've already got a bunch of stuff set up. So I've got a virtual environment for my PyCharm project, which remember you should always be creating a virtual environment when you are working on a new Python project. That way, when you install libraries, you don't have a ton of stuff clogging up your basic Python installation. It all gets compartmentalized into a new virtual environment. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to get my internal library for SQLite and proceed to actually build the database. I'm going to be using some boilerplate code to get me started from the 100 Days of Python course. This is where I started learning about SQLite, and I'll be using a couple of files from here to help me out, like with the boilerplate or the sort of basics, but most of the code I'll be writing myself for everything beyond creating the database and doing the create table. At some point in the project, I finally start to understand what I'm doing. So here, basically this is creating the first table in the database, which is players. Players is going to have how many did I do? I did 5. It'll have 5 fields, so it's gonna be name, position, and then 3 heroes that they play. Obviously, you can play way more than 3 heroes. Most people probably play like 7 to 10, but just for the sake of simplicity, I decided to limit it to 3. And basically what you're seeing here with these text, like name text, position text, you can think of these as like columns in an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet, right? It's just in a database, which is basically an Excel spreadsheet that's built to handle way more data than an Excel spreadsheet. Don't overcomplicate databases, at least at this point. There are lots of complicated things about databases, but it really has more to do with the design and the relationships between tables than it does with like the actual data you're plugging in. So just getting started is very easy. And if you're only dealing with a small amount of data that it pertains to one thing, like players, then it's not complicated. Once we start to add tables, though, it does get complicated. We're just not adding tables right now. So you can think of every table as like a spreadsheet of its own. And what Excel doesn't have is like relationships between spreadsheets. A database is basically built around the idea that tables should have relationships, or spreadsheets should have relationships. That's just not going to come across here that much. So this is the DB browser software. It's like a visual representation of the database outside the code, which you definitely have to have when you're working with database software. Different database tools have different types of software that let you view them. This is a really basic one. SQLite is totally open source, but it is actually used, I think, for a lot of small projects, so that's cool. SQL, by the way, stands for Structured Query Language. A query is a question, right? We think of any interaction with a database as a query, basically. Like you'll see later on, we're going to be asking for the database to give us information based on some kind of logic. And that's an example of a query. It's the same thing as a Google query. We're asking Google to search something. Some people say query. I think it's query. I don't know. We'll look up the pronunciation.
Query. Query.
All right, so I've got a pretty basic setup for any interactive application in Python where I have a main menu, a main method, and then some options based on the user's input. From here, I can start to design my actual methods and functions that I'm interested in for the database. I have to fix an error with this string first for my print statement. I don't know what I did wrong here, but obviously made a mistake. PyCharm features all these great like auto formatting and helper tools that appear around syntax errors or formatting errors in your code. It's really useful to just mouse over those and take advantage of what that little light bulb tells you to do. Sometimes you find out that PyCharm could even write entire functions for you. It can import libraries or functions from other files if they're not in your current file, or just do it automatically. You don't even have to type the code into the keyboard. It just knows what you want to do. So that's the kind of stuff that, as you get better at programming, you just expect your development environment to do a couple of things for you, because turning code into a function is not like a super advanced thing. So we just let the development environment do it for us, and that's all good. It saves a little bit of time. I really spend a lot of time struggling on this print statement. I forgot that I spent so much time with it. I don't know what I did wrong in the beginning, but it's totally busted. Oh my gosh. All right, and then I end up just making a bunch of print statements, I guess. I didn't have to do this. Okay, so quick aside as we're watching this happen. I actually recorded this video and did some voice. Well, no. I didn't do any voiceover, but I'd recorded the video, but I forgot to stop recording in the middle or like after class started because I'd been in my planning. And I left the recording running for like 4 hours on my laptop. And so I recorded like the whole day's worth of lessons and everything. So I just had to delete that and start over. So the first time I did this, I didn't have so many issues with my print statement on the main menu, but now I am. So it's kind of funny, but it's working now. You do whatever. It's a console application. No one's actually ever going to run a console application for the Dota 2 team comp tracker. In the next video, you'll see my little to-do list. And one thing is like, oh, we could make a Flask web app out of this. Might actually be kind of cool and handy. And I was like, oh, it might be fun. But there's a lot of steps to that, so I don't know if I'll do that or not. But here you go. There's the intro video with main. Things you've seen before, nothing new other than the initial database creation. And in the next video, we'll look at actually how would we create a new record for a player in our database.